So how do we judge outcomes? It's a great question. One of the things that I've been very mindful of is that when you're doing community work, it's very important not to be ambitious for projects which other people are ultimately responsible for, which is another way of saying people should determine what they're aiming for, and they should also evaluate and set the indicators of how they want to get there. So imagine Chicago never started off with an agenda or a set of prescribed outcomes, even though it was tricky for funding purposes to describe open-ended processes and get them supported. So what we said to funders is that we wanted to do processes which always had outcomes at 3 levels. That it had outcomes for the individual, that they were always going to be projects and processes in which individuals learned, that it would have outcomes for the organizations they were part of, that it would help the organizations accomplish their core missions more effectively than they could do on their own, and that it would have outcomes for building a civic infrastructure which wouldn't otherwise exist. And so in every one of the projects, we measured those 3 outcomes, which were really community building and learning outcomes. And we let each project specify what their own outcomes were in terms of the particular goals that they set. So in a Citizen Leaders project, people might be intent on creating a community crime stopping program, and they could determine then whether or not the outcomes that they wanted were related to decreases in crime or increases in community engagement or where people hung out on their street corner or whatever, but that was up to them. And we did that again, that process of determining outcomes by having them stand in that future and look around and notice what was different, so that they knew that they were aiming towards something that was a meaningful change. In the Urban Imagination Network, the outcomes were really specific to reading in the first instance, because we were trying to increase the reading capacity in the schools, because that was their primary focus at that point. And they were measured by the reading scores. But we also knew along the way, as we involved parents and teachers, that there were going to be different outcomes for the parents and teachers. Often community building, in the case of the teachers, because we were renewing the vocation of teachers, we were measuring what the retention rate was of the teachers, because many of them were at the edge of quitting when they joined the program, and they all stayed after the program. And so that seemed like a good outcome. But the question of outcomes is tricky when you're dealing with process instead of content, and with funding environment in which people really do like to see hard outcomes. There's been some really good work done, especially in England, in a project called Prove It, which measures social capital indicators. So measuring how can you tell if people are trusting one another more in a community, or how they're getting engaged, or how they view their neighbors. And I would really commend that to your attention. Prove It. It'll give you some good ideas of how to think about social outcomes.